G'day guys and welcome, my name is Michael and I am the Deadaussiegamer, here to share with you my tips, tricks, ideas and strategies for playing and running tabletop role-playing games. Now this is a follow-up video to my previous video on dealing with troublesome PCs with dealing with troublesome GMs. Now, let me start by saying this. Just like the other one, this video is entirely subjective. What I find troublesome may not necessarily be what you guys find troublesome. Every table, every GM, every player is entirely different and entitled to their own thoughts and opinion. This video is going to be about sharing some of the troublesome behaviors I see in certain GMs, based on frequency, based on destructiveness, and share with you a few ideas on not only how to identify these behaviors, but also try and deal with them without necessarily, ripping apart your DM and, throwing to waste the effort and time that they dedicate to running a campaign. So, firstly, I need to say that I define a troublesome GM in two ways. Either a GM who has not prepared for a game, or a GM who is on a power trip. Someone who is just out to play for their own interest and to hang everyone at the table. For me, at the core essence, a GM is always three things. That is a moderator, a narrator, and an entertainer. Those three things are paramount to being a game master. And if you fail in those categories, well, I mean, you're a good storyteller. I mean, I'm sure you're telling a fantastic story, but a GM you are not. So, from within these realms, we have four archetypes I want to talk about that pretty much display the worst elements of these types of GMs, and hopefully we'll be able to talk a little bit about how to overcome it as well. So first up, we have the God Complex GM. Now these GMs are those who tend to arrive at a game under the impression that they are the authority, or in some way, shape or form, superior to the other people at the table. Now I don't care if you've been playing for 5 years, 10 years, 100 years. If you sit down at a table and you feel as though you are in a higher position of power as a GM, I feel like that is a very toxic and very troublesome attitude to have. Even new players need people who can get them into the game, not by ostracizing them or bragging about how much they know, but by bringing them up to their level. That's what it's all about. The God Complex is more about keeping people down than rising people up, and that for me is just not what a GM's all about. Rules, lawyers, sort of those who believe their thoughts and ideas to be completely infallible, they kind of fall into the God Complex. The idea of being infallible is also a very interesting one, as often you'll see that the God Complex GMs can try to blame inanimate objects or blame other things for the events that occur. Have you ever heard this ever happen at your table? Hey guys, listen, I just crit you guys. I'm so sorry. Look, you can have a look at my dice. Look, it rolled a natural 20. I know you're on 2 hit points, but you're dead. I'm sorry. Yep, I mean, you can see the dice there. Or even heard, listen guys, I'd like to speed up the combat, but the module says that this is what happens. That's what's happening. Look, you can read the book if you want. Infallible GMs who suffer from this blame other things for what is entirely in their control. See, the thing about a GM is you are in control. You have the authority over the game. You have the absolute power and ability to create and construct your world. The reason the GM screen exists is so that you can twist and turn fate to better suit the narrative you're sharing with your players. Whether or not you use this ability or you choose not to is entirely up to you as a GM. But what you certainly should not do is you shouldn't blame the dice or the adventure or anything else when things go south for your players. If your players are not having fun, that responsibility lies square with you. And you need to take that on board, because without taking that on board, you never view what is wrong or what you can change or how you can grow as a GM. You simply leave it all to chance and say, well, it's not my fault that you guys have all died, or it's not my fault that you guys aren't having fun. Maybe you should be doing something different. It doesn't really improve any scenarios, and it makes for a very troublesome GM. In order to overcome this, the first thing I've got to say is that you need to view what the seat is. What is the GM's seat? The power given to you as a GM is given by the players. They hand to you an energy, right? This energy represents their ability to leave the world behind, to throw away their understanding of physics and reality, and to immerse themselves into a great story and adventure. It is not power that they're handing to you, but a responsibility. You are responsible for their entertainment and their fun and their joy. You're responsible for the story that you're telling and how interesting or how in-depth or not in-depth it happens to be. So when something goes wrong, again, taking that responsibility and saying, okay, guys, well, listen, you are really not enjoying the 15 waves of summoned monsters I've thrown at you. Maybe I'll change it up. Or maybe I have been looking at this encounter all wrong because you guys think that this guy is actually a good dude and you want to start a conversation when it says he attacks on sight. Maybe I'll have a conversation. Maybe I'll get to work on that. This is what happens when you when you move outside of that zone, when you are outside of the realm of my GM word is my GM law and it will be upheld. And you become more fluid and storytelling with your players. All right, so the next topic here we are going to look at, the next archetype, is the prep and players. Now, the prep and players specifically involve those who do not give themselves enough time to prepare for a game. Now, look, I can honestly say that as someone who runs a ton of games, I am always short on prep time. So I can relate that sometimes you get to a game and you're like, geez, I just did not find any time to do anything to prepare for this game. That's not the fault here. The fault isn't, people having a lack of time. It is really just when it becomes a consecutive thing, when it becomes a constant that you are underprepared as a GM and it affects your table. If, for example, you haven't read your module as you've arrived at a game and your players catch you reading the book while they're just sitting there twiddling their thumbs, or you've found a whole bunch of monsters and you're constantly going flip, 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 flip through all these different books trying to find how exactly this monster is to be run. Or, hell, it could even go the other way, where you believe yourself to be such an amazing GM, a wonderful GM, a skilled and veteran master of the game mastering arts, that you feel as though you don't need to prepare for a game. You just show up and you know the adventure, and you can wing it for the most part. We do have a subject on the wing it GMs, but we'll get to that in a minute. Those ones here, these kind of characters, I feel like you're doing yourself a disservice, As for finding time, for me personally, I try to always carry a notebook with me. Whenever I'm on a train or on the toilet or if I'm waiting for dinner or hell, even when I'm eating dinner at some point, I will try to write down notes. And the thing is with note-taking like that, it always builds, Like a whole week, if you let's just say you spend 5 minutes on the can every single day, hell, like say twice a day. That's 10 minutes per day, 7 days a week. That is already, 140 minutes that you've just magically conjured. If you dedicate those kind of little tiny gap moments to it, you will find the time, you will find those moments. And it doesn't have to be consecutive. As long as it's a solid, I'd say maybe 5 to 10 minutes, it's plenty. And your players will appreciate it and your quality of game will go through the roof. As for the other type who believe that they don't need to prepare, you do. That's the simple truth. The simple truth is you do. There is no GM at no level of experience that does not need to prepare for a game. Unless it's an absolute emergency and you have suddenly been gone, hey guys, listen, we're running a game in 20 minutes. Do you think you can pull something together? Unless you're in that kind of scenario, always, always, always prepare. Not preparing is actually a sign of inexperience, in my opinion. All right, so next thing is the Win It GM. In to Win is a type of GM who does not yet know he is game mastering. He is a person who is playing the game. Often you'll find that the GM is slightly more competitive, or they find scenarios where there's no real character or real story. It's just, okay, now we're in a battle, and it's my guys versus your guys. So I'm going to roll, and I did this, and I do that, and I roll this, and I do that, and you roll that. And that on itself, the competitive GM thing, can work in a lot of tables and can be a lot of fun in some tables. But the GM has the authority, the right, the ability to cheat in the game. Now, I know that some people will argue with me and will go blue in the face if I suggest this, but it's in the book, right? One of the first pages is all about GMs being able to arbitrate and dictate what exactly they roll and how to manage the rules. So when you are when you are playing with a competitive GM who is in to win and has the ability to cheat where you as a player absolutely do not, that causes problems because you can understand where things go. You can recognize the points where your GM has created an increased difficulty in the encounter, and all of a sudden, miraculously, when you are just about to die, suddenly, twist of fate, you suddenly pull through, even though you're rolling the same numbers and they're rolling the same numbers, and just suddenly they're not hitting and you are. This is not great, mind you, and I'm currently in a game with that happening, and I've been sort of floating around in the background. And by the way, if my GM is watching this, don't take it personally. It's how I learn to do these videos and stuff like that. I basically observe people's GMing styles and I, sort of take notes for myself so that I can become a better GM. This one character who is running a game is currently quite severely cheating because he believes that there is an arms race. Members of the group are more powerful than the encounters that he set out, so he's increasing the difficulties. Biggest problem is that it's inconsistent. Sometimes when he rolls, you can kind of tell he's not really rolling. Sometimes when he's, sort of modifying encounters, he suddenly modifies it back and hopes that no one notices. But simple mathematics kind of shows you that happens. It's like, you've rolled a 12. Okay, that hits. What do you mean it hits? It's like, well, you said 12 hit before. Oh, no, it doesn't hit. Why? Because I'm on like 3 hit points? Doesn't make sense. So things like that come into it. And honestly, the best bit of advice that I can give to the win it GMs is quite literally this. The GM's toughest role, and I have a big respect for all GMs that learn this lesson, is no matter how great a GM you are, no matter how intelligent, cunning, and how much you'd want to prove yourself as a GM, our biggest challenge is remembering that everything we put in the game is designed to be a consequence following an obstacle, not a kill. Everything we create is supposed to fail. Of course, the players are supposed to pay something for overcoming the obstacles, whether it's skills, whether it's hit points, whether it's abilities, whether it's even just time. Everything is designed to be overcome. If it's not, I mean, let's face it, we're GMs. We could say, here's a CR20 dragon at the entrance of a dungeon. Why? Because, well, who puts the biggest thing at the end? Why not put it at the front? We can logic our way through a whole bunch of different scenarios, but at the end of the day, we build games and we build stories to be played through, not to just sit there and wipe out our players. If you want to play competitively, take the player seat back, go sit down and be a player. If, however, you really want to tell a good story and you want to bring everyone on a great journey, don't play it to win it. If you write something in advance and it doesn't work out, have it not work out, but then add that to your prep for next week to accommodate. I had a scenario where a player of mine had a damage resistance to bludgeoning weapons. That was overcome by bludgeoning weapons. And everyone had scimitars, and eventually it got to a point where it's like, well, I'm not dealing any damage to this guy. Very well, at a certain point, they simply switched to cudgels. And the player sort of said, oh, so what's happening with this? And it's like, well, no, there's still some people who have scimitars, and you're fine against them, but they know that they're not hurting you. There are some people, however, who have a cudgel instead of a scimitar, and they're attacking you instead. But I don't do that mid-game. I don't do that in the middle of a fight where I'm like, hitting him with my scimitar, and I'm not doing anything. He pulls out a cudgel that you didn't see before because he has it, and he totally has it right now, and here, you take that now, and now he's winning. I save it for the next time because it's way better than trying to, I suppose, nerf or control your players during a game. Because often you'll make mistakes just because you're reacting to something rather than, putting it on a breadboard. All right, the last one that we want to talk about today is GM logic. Now, this one's very interesting because this is probably the most subjective, and I feel like a lot of my GM viewers are going to completely disagree with this. But a GM's logic can sometimes be troubling. If you're a GM who has a good logic, like, for example, for me, I am a character GM. I think that if you roleplay well, you should be rewarded for your efforts. You shouldn't have a person who throws everything into roleplay and a person who just sort of rocks up to a game, has no real character or backstory, and they should be given the same rewards. I feel like one person is really helping me with the immersion and the narrative, while the other person is there to play. And I want to reward that person for his good roleplay. This is GM logic. This is about my personal experience, my personal growth, and how I shape and construct the world. These things are very personal to GMs and can be very hard to dig at when it comes to, dealing with a troublesome logic. Mostly because people take it personally when you attack their style of GMing. Like if someone said to me, listen, Mike, we're sick and tired of you making stuff up. Use the monsters in the core rule. Don't make any changes because we just want to fight these monsters. We don't want to fight a razor spittle nimbleback or whatever the hell that is. We want to fight just a dire boar. Why don't you just call it a dire boar or a howler or whatever? That's fine too. You can't, when people take that, they can't take it personally. Now, GM logic that becomes trouble is when it really just starts impacting your players negatively. The first example I'm going to give for this kind of negative GM logic actually came from one of my first games, where the GM was under the impression that no one can play anything that he has not personally read. Now, I understand the logic behind this. He doesn't want to get out of his depth, and he doesn't want to spend most of his time reading into rules, but I also get the impression he does not trust his players with characters. Short and simple. It came down to a point where he told me this, and I said, okay, cool, so what books do you have? And he said, I have these books. And I said, great, I've got those books as well. Do I need to bring them at the table? And he's like, well, yes, you do need to also bring these books to the table. I was like, okay, cool, fair enough. I want to use a monk. And he goes, oh, I haven't read the monk yet. And it was wait, so can I use the core rulebook or not? And he's like, well, no, you can only use the ones that I've read and I know. So I can use a fighter, right? Can I use a wizard? No, you cannot use a wizard because I don't know spellcasting. Can I use a cleric? No, that's a spellcaster as well. So my choices are or fighter. Or rogue. Oh, okay, so fighter or rogue. See, that GM logic is not great. It doesn't shape for a fun game. I mean, it's a game, don't get me wrong, but for me, I look at that situation and I'm like, well, that just for me tells you that you don't trust me as a player, you don't trust me to be able to make my character, and you don't trust the character in the game. For whatever reason it was that he came up with it was a thing. The second one I want to talk about is one that's in a more recent campaign. And again, if the GM is watching, I do apologize. This isn't supposed to dig anyone out or single anyone out, but single. So the GM in question struggled with understanding how stealth worked in Pathfinder. Now, for those of you who don't know, stealth basically works as a part of a move action when someone moves into cover. If you are doing this while you are observed, you need to find cover in order to get behind. You can alternatively try to move into a different position by making a bluff check to distract them and, sort of move away. That way they have no idea where you've gone. Now, what this person was saying is no matter what the circumstances were, you could not get behind cover and take a stealth check without making a bluff check first. The reason for this was because he believed that if you ducked behind a chest, for example, they know you're behind the chest. That's it. You don't have concealment from behind the chest, even though you're completely behind it, because he knows you're there. So he's not flat-footed or anything like that. Which, in turn, as some of you may realize, makes it so that stealth is not practical in any way. Especially for characters, like myself at the time, who are playing ranged rogue characters who require to duck in and out of cover, using the sniping maneuver of a DC 10, minus 10, to duck behind cover and then be able to get sneak attack damage as I flick out of, shrubberies and chests and stuff like that. In order to do this, I needed to make a bluff check, which in turn made no sense because I could use a bluff check to use what's called a feint maneuver. And by using a feint, I was able to make the enemy flat-footed, rendering my need to stealth pointless. So it was two checks, with one of which being the same check shared, for the same result. which for me just didn't fly as logic. But thankfully the GM was really, really accommodating, and despite this logic being what it was, allowed me to redesign my character. So I was very thankful for that. But these type of ideas, this kind of very line in the sand type GM logic things, can be very troubling. What you want to do if you get to that point is you need to remember that the game is fluid. The game is about fun. It is not about trying to adhere to rules or try and stay by some sort of arbitrary standard of gameplay that is observed by these rules. What you want to do is you want to remember, what is my player trying to do, and how is he trying to have fun, or she? And how best can I, as a GM, accommodate this? Now, I'm not saying pander to your players. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying that planting your feet and drawing a line in your sand, stomping up and down, doesn't get you any favors. It makes it for a very difficult GM, because your players will get to a point where they just either have difficulty trusting you as a GM or have difficulty approaching you with the things that they would have fun with. And whether or not you mind that or not, eventually that will just whittle down over time, making them have less and less fun with the game as opposed to more. Alright guys, well, that is pretty much the 4 basic types of troublesome GMs that you may find floating about. Just to go over it real quick again, so for the God Complex, remember, you are responsible for fun and enjoyment, not an authority of it. The prep and players, find those little times, find those moments. Never get into the habit of not preparing for games. The in to win, practice losing. Honestly, find a player, do a one-on-one session, and anything that player rolls, you need to find a way for them to win. Whether or not they fail, if they fail a check, you need to find a way for them to win the scenario. If the player loses, you lose. And if you get that attitude, I swear to God, it helps so much with the in-to-win mentality. If you are sitting there going, okay, my player fell off a roof, what do I do now? Make a reflex save to grab the gutter. Damn it, he failed that one too. All right, as you fall through the air, you see a window. You think that maybe you could, sort of throw a rope and catch onto one of the small hooks at the windowsill. Roll an attack action. Damn it, he missed it as well. Okay, as you plummet into the water, you try to angle yourself so you hit the soft surf instead of the rocky shores. So on and so forth. Keeping on making them fail forward and keeping them alive and working through an encounter can definitely, alter that perspective of, I need to win. You will eventually find achievement in your player's success, and that, I think, is the best place to be. Lastly, GM logic. Simply stay fluid, guys. Look, everyone's got their own style, everyone's got their own thing. Don't take it personally if someone doesn't appreciate your style. Instead, just remember that you're there to have fun and play with the majority of the group. If the majority of the group says, hey, that rule's really bogus, change the rule. If a whole group basically turns around and says, hey, you know what, that's actually pretty damn miserable what's happening with this guy here. We don't really like the fact that he has this. Actually, fun fact, this happened recently. I was playing a summoner, and I was recently able to, and I added a monster to my list, by the way, in case people ask about it. I added a Hydra to my list of summoning spells, summoned it using my level 4 summoning spell ability, and it showed up, it attacked, and it was a great frontline fighter. The frontline fighters then brought up the fact that, this creature was making it hard for them to really shine on the front lines. Now, bringing that up, the GM turns around and says, well, you can't have the Hydra. Problem was, as he said, it was because I couldn't handle it. And when he says that, it's sort of like, well, okay, we're only level, 7 or 8. If you can't handle a Hydra at this level, I mean, we're going to have a lot of problems as we level up. But, we kind of resolved it all. But, challenging that logic and being able to use that logic is paramount. Communication is key for the GM logic problem. And, just learn to communicate with your players, learn to communicate with your with fellow GMs from the community, and you will be absolutely stunning at GMing. All right, thanks again for listening, guys. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. If you want to see more videos like that, then stay tuned to this channel, because we're going to be continuing all of this advice. We're also going to be doing character and portrayal videos on the Fridays for Australians. And hopefully we'll be adding a few new shows, including Tales from the Undertaker, a horror-based Pathfinder 1st edition game. So, be on the lookout for that too. If you want to go see some of the other stuff we do, then head on over to our Facebook page, facebook.com/Deadaussiegamer, or come, chat with us on Discord. I love meeting people on Discord, and there's even a channel there where you can ask me to voice act some of your notable NPCs or PCs even, and we'll try and make a video of that as well. If you want to support Deadaussiegamer, then head over to our Patreon page, whereas for as little as $1 a month, you can really help us make a massive difference in keeping shows like this and many more up and running for the future. Till next time, guys, as always, from the Dead Aussie Gamer, game hard or die trying.